anyway, thank you so much for joining and attending the first lecture. And it is actually a decent time for you. It's a little bit of an ungodly time for me because it's 9 o'clock at night, and it's actually very cold. So I would like to start by explaining a little bit about the title, which to be honest, the lecture is going on a slightly different direction than I had envisioned at first. So, but I would still like to explain what's the. Let me see. What is it goes? Oh, okay. So there is some problems with the changing the slides. So the first part of the title in Portuguese, do Inferno, do Engenho, it comes from actually a citation, a quote from a Jesuit priest who was a missionary in Brazil in the first half of the 17th century, and he was one of the main Portuguese literary figures, and to a certain degree has been a little bit in disgrace in the last few years due to some, I think, misunderstandings of what he was writing. Some of his writings. He has been highly criticized in the context of colonial discussions of archaeology or I'm sorry, of history, because he was part of the colonial establishment. But at the same time, he gives us some of the most poignant descriptions of the suffering in the sugar mills, and having in mind that his descriptions were actually from the sugar mills in Brazil that were quite different from the sugar mills that we had that existed in São Tomé, but at the same time, São Tomé was actually the beginning of the sugar system economy and the plantation system based on monoculture of one crop, sugar in this case, associated with the slavery as understood as black slavery. So the reason why I had intended to or use this quote from Padre António Vieira was because I was intending to actually go on the direction of talking about the structure of the production in the sugar mill, and I ended up changing my ways of doing things. So I'm actually going to talk more about newer ways that we are trying to engage local communities in archaeology, and this has been going on for some time. It is quite common in the US, for example, with the Native American communities, and in Australia, for example, it's also quite common to engage with local communities. In Africa, some of my colleagues are now starting to do it. It's a novelty in Africa, and since the beginning, I had because of my previous experience in a project that I did in São Tomé, I'm sorry, in Mozambique, I had at the core of my research having in mind, or having the local community at the center of my interests, and doing something that would be of interest for everybody. And I was being very naive, I must say. So things didn't go the way I was expecting, and I will let you know what happened that went well and what didn't work. But so this is actually going to be more about how I'm trying to incorporate new trends of archaeology, and that goes around the engagement with the local community. I will start by explaining what the word engenho means, because it shows in the title, and it is the word that I tend to use to refer to the sugar mill. I know that Francis translated the title, but the word engenho in Portuguese, basically it means machine, and it is an old word that shows up in medieval documents and so on. But it came really to mean the sugar mill, and it is particularly associated with the sugar mills in Brazil, and that's how the sugar mills in Brazil are actually referred to. most documents don't use the word plantation, although São Tomé was at the core of the plantation industry and the plantation system. We can say that this combination of monocrop plantation and the use of enslaved labor, it started in big scale, I should say, in São Tomé. There are cases in Cape Verde and in the Canary Islands, and also some notes on the use of enslaved labor in Madeira, but not in the scale that developed in São Tomé, then was exported to Brazil and Caribbean and North America, and in the end came to define some of the social characteristics of the modern world that we are still actually being the heirs of. And so the word that appears in Portuguese documents for the plantation, so we don't use the word plantation, it is fazenda, which means estate. And so all documents, that's what they use. The first time that the word engenho is used in Portuguese or in Portuguese documents, it's by a pilot who did a description of the island of São Tomé in the 1540s, and then the term actually just became generalized to mean the sugar production in Brazil. And today in São Tomé, for example, the word is still used, but it's used to refer to this little machine that you see in this picture, and which is used to make to get the juice to make the sugar alcohol, which we call aguardente, which is basically rum. Brazil has been Brazil and the Caribbean, but particularly Brazil has influenced greatly the way we have portrayed the landscapes of the sugar production, and that's actually not the most correct way of doing it. So I find it quite interesting that in historiographies of São Tomé that have been written mainly by Portuguese scholars, the illustrations actually come from Brazil, and they come from a time period that it's much later than the production in São Tomé. In São Tomé, at the height of the production was the 16th century, also some production in the 17th century, but the pictures that usually are used for the illustration of the system, the economic system in São Tomé, are actually from Brazil. One of the most used images is this one of the enslaved man making the engenho. This is what we call a 3-cylinder engenho work, and it has been reproduced a number of times. Another favorite for the illustrations of the sugar production, what I call the sugar landscapes, it's Frans Post, was a Dutch painter from the 17th century, and he was part of an expedition, a scientific expedition to Brazil, and then ended up painting more than 140 paintings that portray the landscapes of Brazil, many of them with sugar mills. What happens is that most of these paintings that were done by Frans Post were actually done after he had left Brazil, and they are in reality idealized landscapes that were done according to the style and the taste of his Dutch clients. Don't really portray the reality, although some of the details are actually pretty close to what may have been a sugar mill, but again in Brazil, not and 100 years later than what was the sugar production in São Tomé, not what happened in São Tomé. So when I started doing this project, I was particularly interested in the role that São Tomé had in the construction of the Atlantic world, because as it is a very small island, most people don't even know where it is. So that's why I always have a map showing the island, and unfortunately this is not the whole map of Africa, but you can figure out where it is. It's close to Ghana and Nigeria. So, but it is a very small island. It's only 42 kilometers long by 32 or 36 kilometers wide. But what happened in São Tomé in the 15th, 16th, and early 17th century actually shaped the modern world and what we call modernity. And so the goals of the project in general were to study, first of all, the material culture of the 16th and 17th century. In São Tomé, there has never been an archaeology, or until my project, there was no archaeology in the island. And so, and even in history books and historical discussions, the island kind of is very marginal if it is actually mentioned, and never from an archaeological perspective. So my goal was actually to go beyond the documents that the Portuguese historians have analyzed and have done some of the historiography of the island. But I was more interested in the population's daily life, how it was that these populations constructed their own identities, because São Tomé, it's a very interesting case. It's more, in terms of identity, it resembles more the Caribbean than continental Africa. And I have worked in the continent since the 1990s. So for me, it was quite interesting to look and to be in São Tomé for the first time and see how much more similar it was with Barbados, where I had done a project in the early 2000s, than it was with Ghana, where I did my dissertation research. So I was quite interested in, I'm quite interested in the construction of a Creole identity. I'm also quite interested in the resistance to the system of the plantation, because some of the earliest mentions to to rebellions, enslaved people's rebellions, happened in São Tomé since the early 16th century that we have mentioned, and it was quite something that happened quite often. So what I was really interested in was to establish an archaeological research project that would address some of these issues in relation to the early sugar economic system. And at the same time, it was to introduce archaeological research in the country, since there had never been an archaeology project. The site of Praia Melão, which was first mentioned to me by a colleague from São Tomé, it is the only site identified so far. I published recently an article on the site, and it is the first time that a site is mentioned in an archaeological journal. And so I started by working on this site of Praia Melão, but my goal is actually to survey and locate other sites that belong to the same time period, and also to train students from the University of São Tomé, since São Tomé doesn't have archaeologists. So to train, let's say, some of the students to start becoming for them to start becoming the archaeologists of the country. And one of my main questions was, particularly in the context of the discussions that we have now in terms of archaeology, it was how to decolonize archaeology, and what does this mean in the context of São Tomé, if it could actually work. And I was really, I was naive, thinking that it would be really easy. I would, land there and start a project, and it would be, from the beginning, it would be engagement with the local population. But the whole project, it's actually done in collaboration with colleagues from the University of São Tomé. And I started initially working also with two colleagues from the office, the National Office of Culture. It's called the Direção-Geral de Cultura. It's a governmental office for culture. And I started with the two colleagues, and people end up being replaced in political positions, and so now I have to reestablish the connections with the new people. And as I was saying, community engagement, it is really important for me, because I find we need to do socially relevant archaeology, something that's useful in this case for the country, and we need to be accountable to the diverse communities in this case, the different stakeholders in the country. I just didn't know that it was going to be so complicated. And at the same time, to have a discussion on diverse values of heritage, because the Direção-Geral, the DGC, it is the the main stakeholder, the official stakeholder on cultural heritage, but it still has a very colonial gaze. And so what it is in reality considered heritage in São Tomé tends to be the chiloli, which is a form of street theater, traditional street theater, some types of dances and music. And so it's kind of like all the colonial gaze or the colonial perspective of what it is African art. That's the masks, the music, and the dance. And so one of the goals that myself and my São Tomé colleague, who is a professor at the University of São Tomé, it is to actually change that and have historical heritage, built heritage, and archaeological heritage also considered heritage and being classified and preserved. So São Tomé, it is a small island, as I was mentioning. It is only 42 by 36 kilometers, but it has had since the 16th century. It has had a major geopolitical role, has played a major geopolitical role in the expansion and the relationship that Europeans had with Africa, but also with Americas. This map of the island, and it's kind of like a very roundish map. It's from 1607, and it is in this map, Praia Melão, the site that I will be mentioning, already appears mentioned there. Most of the other sites that show up, there are lots of references to engenho d'água, and engenho d'água just means water. Hydraulic mills, and most of the mills in São Tomé were hydraulic mills. There were a couple that were not, like the other one that's mentioned, and also that's marked on the bottom of the page. And that one appears, depending on the version of the map, it appears either as engenho de mão, a hand mill, or engenho de moço, engenho of young people or young men, so meaning that it is people that actually make it work. So the previous map, it's actually an inset of this 1607 map by Mercator and Ondius, and the whole map, it's actually about the Guinea coast, and it shows the importance that the Dutch at this point were already giving to São Tomé because of its geopolitical interest and the interest that it was recognized since very early, the potential for the production of sugar, but also as an interpol for the exchange, the bringing in slaves from the West African coast to the Caribbean, Brazil, and later on to the Americas. So the position of the island was so important that it was made as occupied a special place in this map by Mercator. This is actually the location of the site, and as I said, I learned about the site in 2020, and it was indicated by my colleague. I was looking for engenhos, and people sent me to see a couple of those machines that make alcohol, and so there was not really a general recognition of what archaeological sites were. So when I was looking for old things, I was sent to a rice factory from the Chinese from the 1970s. And then when I would say, oh, do you know a place where there are engenhos, I would be sent to see some of these machines. But this is the location of the site. It is quite a magnificent site. It's a stand-up building. A stone building, which is what made it really exceptional. It is not only its size and how magnificent it is, but it's also kind of a spooky area. And for now that we are close to Halloween, it's actually quite ideal for Halloween, as you'll see, because it is involved in lots of vegetation, and it's most people that live nearby don't even know about it because it's so hidden. And in the island, no one really knows about it except a couple of people at the university and half a dozen people in in the village nearby, and the village it's called Praia Melão. So we have references in documents to the site since the earlier one, it's 1597, and we can actually reconstruct the almost until today the list of owners of the property. And the property, what we call a fazenda, it's not only the house that had a sugar mill attached to it, but it is the land that belongs to this property. And this property, this fazenda, this estate was during the 16th and 17th century was the largest estate in the island. And even today, you know, it's quite big. And one of the problems we have is to know exactly were the legal owners, because there is no written there are no written documents about the ownership of the site today, and that creates quite some problems, because people who actually have properties that used to be in this bigger estate, they claim, oh, I'm the owner of the estate of Praia Melão, and sometimes they have like a little piece somewhere. And so after my first visit in 2020, when I identified the site, I did a field season, a short field season last year in 2022. And the idea was first to do a survey of the site, drawing and do the photography of the building, to try to get some basic information on the site, and that would allow then to apply for funding. I wanted to do a lot of survey around the site itself, and I saved that for this year. And then with the funding that I was able to get between 2022 and 2023, we were able to start some excavations. It is really only at a pilot project level, but we have had some really good data results, and you'll see how things ended up in the end. So we did some STPs around the site. The idea was to do maybe 20 or 30 STPs. So for those of you who don't know the parlance, it's shovel test pits, which are small testing units done with a shovel, but it was to just locate some possible features or areas of interest around the building that then we could do test units, and then try to understand the stratigraphy, artifacts that would come out, to have some idea of what was being used, and maybe try to find other kinds of structures that then would allow to expand the site. And then at the same time, this would be always paired with the community engagement. And the ultimate goal that myself and my colleagues have is to actually classify the site, to especially to prevent it from being destroyed. There is an industry of harvesting stones from buildings, and there has been a couple of instances where people try to actually go and get some stones from this building. The survey that we had initially tried, or that I had imagined and envisioned to do, wasn't really successful because of the environment, the conditions of the environment. So this is a picture from the rainy season in 2020, but you can see this is the path that leads to the site, and you don't even see the site, and the site is quite big. I mean, it has walls with 10 meters tall. And so the vegetation, it's a big of a problem. This picture, it's actually from the dry season that I took it this year. So it's the time of the year that we call Gravana, so it's a dry season. But as you see, this is quite nearby the site, and the level of grass, capim, it's quite dense, so it's basically impossible to see the ground. And for us to do survey, we would have to actually cut the vegetation to be able to actually see the ground. Just to give you another idea, this is actually a site that's about 300 meters away, and it is an abandoned house, and the property was abandoned in the late 70s, early 80s, and this is how it is. And you can see the relationship between the student and the vegetation. And this is actually quite clear because quite often we don't see much ahead of us. And so the survey aspect was kind of put on the back burner because we needed to be efficient and optimize the resources that we had. So I decided to concentrate on the archaeological site and try to understand the stratigraphy and some of the possible functional areas around the house, because this was the main house where the owners would live, and that had the engine, the sugar mill part of it, but there would be a lot of other infrastructures for the production of sugar. And for one of the things that I was quite interested in trying to locate, it would be where did the enslaved people lived, where were their villages or quarters, or where was that people were living. So this was actually how the site was in 2020 inside. So this is actually the main room, what I call the workroom, and you'll see it on a plan. But this was how it was. So we had to actually this was the outside. So lots of lianas that made it almost impossible to walk around, and walk inside it was quite difficult to actually see anything. So the first thing that we had to do was to clear the site, and this we did it in 2022 with the collaboration of the Direção Geral, also the office, the official institution that deals with the cultural heritage for the government, and with it was the first engagement that we had with the local community. And so all those young men that you see, they live in the village nearby. And it was quite a good experience. They have been working with me. They worked with me last year, and they work with me again this year. And they are kind of like my clique, my clack, whatever it's the word. So they follow. They created actually a WhatsApp group, and they are all in touch with each other and with me. So it became kind of a community. We did the survey and the drawings and the photography of the site in 2022, and this is how we cut some of the vegetation inside. So it's the same that you had seen earlier, that I had mentioned earlier. We didn't do a great job because it was just 4 or 5 of us, but and we had not a lot of time, and the main goal was actually to do the plan and the elevations of the building. So this is actually the plan of the building. So there is a big work area where the millstones would have been, and that's actually adjacent to the water race, where the wheels, the water wheels would be located, and those water wheels would make the stones work. And then there are 2 other, and that area, it's doesn't have a second floor. The southern part has a second floor, and that's on the second floor. That's the owners would have lived. It's actually quite small, but it was actually not uncommon for buildings of this time period in Portugal to have only a couple of rooms. And some of the infrastructures, like the kitchens, for example, would have been outside. One of the adjacent rooms, which I call Casa de Purga or Casa de Cozedura, I'm still not sure what it is, but it was connected to where the sugar cane would be crushed, and because the walls are all burned, and very intense burning, and which is not from burning the grass or burning the vegetation, it's much more intense, could have been the place where they were doing the purification and the boiling of the sap of the sugar cane. So this is actually how that room that I call the workroom was this year. And I must say that we clean it every time, but it's actually, well, it's counterproductive, because in the sense that when we cut the vegetation, then the following year comes stronger. We have to keep doing it, and hopefully one of our plans is to do to get money for preservation, so we can actually take care of killing the vegetation. Most of what you see on the foreground, it's actually the result of the crumbling of the wall. So most of it, it's actually rubble, and we do not see the floors of the site. One of the interesting aspects that kind of calls attention to the you know, or it is a window into the worldview of who lived and worked there. It's that in this workroom, there, which would have been the sugar mill per se, the walls have graffiti, and the graffiti tend to be actually religious graffiti, and they are in agreement with they are very similar to graffiti that appear in houses and constructions in Portugal, also in the 16th and 17th century, and they tend to be religious graffiti. So what you see are actually representations of the cross. They have two here. They look different, but in reality, it is the same idea. So you have the world, which is not really the world; it's the Calvary, and the same here, where you have the cross on top of it, but the styles are slightly different, but they are possibly from the same time period that may have been done by different people. But those are only two of those that we found. We found a lot more, and so other aspects that we were able to actually look into in 2022 and this year was actually some of the architectonic features. So the upper level, which is where the family, the owners would live, has plaster, for example, and the first floor doesn't have plaster. And then it has all these, for example, in this case, what you see are, it's actually one cabinet, a wall cabinet, and there are also similar wall cabinets outside because there would have been like a veranda or something. This is actually one of the views of the place that would be the workroom, and as you see, these walls are about 7 meters tall, so it's quite magnificent. But if we don't take care of it, it will come down very easily. One of the drawings that we did last year, you can see that outside there is also a large cross that's a graffiti on the outside, and then there was a shadow, like a ghost of a cabinet that also had a cross. So the motive of the cross appears throughout the area where people who worked, so either enslaved or free blacks or free or convicts, Portuguese convicts that were sent to São Tomé who have worked, you see these religious motifs repeating themselves. So this is actually a view of what it's called the water race. So the wheel or the wheels would have been located somewhere around here. The water would come from above, would fall on the wheel, make the wheel work, and then make the stone mills work. And then what you see down here, it's actually where the water. Where the water would run to go out to the. There is a small river down slope, and that probably would go to the river. This is another view of the mill race, or the water race. I'm sorry, seen from above, and what you see at the top, it is what it's called a head wall, and there would be another water race built down up here, and then it would connect somehow with probably structures made of wood to send the water to the wheels. And you can see actually where the water was actually falling down on the wall. It still has the marks. And last year, I actually had an unfortunate accident, and I broke a leg somewhere down here, up here. The soil kind of crumbled under my feet, and I ended up breaking a leg. And this is relevant only for something that you'll see next. So this is actually how it's an image that I usually use to give an idea of how the system may have worked. In this from North Wales in the 19th century, but it would have been something like that, where you'd have some wooden structures that would send the water to the water wheel to make it work. And so this is actually a reconstruction that a friend of mine who is an architect made based on the plans and elevations. He made and some of the pictures. He made a reconstruction of how most likely the building could have been. But still, we only know about the building and the characteristics of the building. We don't know much about who the life of people that work there or live there. So this year, I had some funding, some not much, but a little funding, and I was able to actually plan an excavation season. So as you see, we had to clear everything. Those are two of the students clearing the outside, so we could see the soil. And one, I was mentioning that I broke a leg last year, and one of the advices that I was given was, well, there were people who died there, the ancestors died there, so we need to do a ceremony. And one of the possibilities was that last year I broke my leg because the ancestors were not happy with me. And so this young guy with the red t-shirt, he does ancestral ceremonies, and he told me that it was possibly one of the ancestors that had pushed me, and so I had fall down the hill and broke my leg. So we had to do a ceremony, which is quite interesting because it is really evidence of the Creole culture that exists in São Tomé. So I did the research for my PhD in Ghana, and each time that I would do something, open a unit, do some survey or something, we would have to do a ceremony. Usually it was a libation. And this one was very complicated because it was like a banquet for the ancestors, and combines some things that I could recognize from my work and my experience in continental Africa, particularly in Ghana, and things that I can see that are similar probably to candomblé, are more similar to candomblé in Brazil, where the prayers were actually Catholic prayers, but then the performance, it was a performance for the ancestors, and it was done according to non-Western traditions. And this banquet was quite complicated because he started by asking me where people were from. And so we had to provide food, or I had to provide food for all the different ethnic identities, let's put it this way. So he asked me, are people from Benin? I was like, yes. So we have to have such and such. There were people from Angola. Yes, there were people from Angola. So we need to have fuba. There were children. Yes, there were children. So we need to have sweets. And so there was this kind of it's not only respecting the ancestors, the local ancestors, which is very much like what I'm used to in continental Africa, but at the same time respecting their origins and taking that into consideration. And one of the narratives that that he was actually talking about, it was these people suffered a lot, so we need to actually keep them in peace. And as you'll see, there were actually cigarettes and some lights going on, and they kept saying, "Oh, my carbon 14 is going down the hall." But anyway, so we did the field school with the students from the University of São Tomé, and I hired a couple of young men from the village nearby, and so those were the ones that had already worked with me last year. We actually had to do a lot of improvisation because most of the things and most of the equipment have to be brought in from outside. There are lots of Chinese stores that sell equipment for construction for building, but they are actually of very poor quality. And besides that, my grant was quite small, so we had to improvise a lot. And we used the pieces of the palm trees for the to try to do the markings of the units and so on. Again, we had to work with the equipment that we had. The soil is very difficult to actually dig. It's very, very hard. It's very clayish and very hard. And so we actually had to work. We worked on artificial levels of 10 centimeters, but most of the times we actually had to use pickaxes because we could not do it with just with shovels. And as you see, shoes are optional. Although I have to admit, I told the students, my first 3 years that I did the archaeology, I also used the flip-flops, but they would use flip-flops sometimes. Most times they would throw away their flip-flops and just be bare feet. So this was actually the very first unit ever excavated in São Tomé, and it deserved an historical photography of the whole team that was working at the site. My community outreach was not as successful as I was expecting, and most of it had to do with the fact that São Tomé, it's a very hierarchical place. Still has very old-fashioned hierarchies from the colonial time, and so people who belong to certain groups are the ones who actually dictate what can be done. And so I was quite limited in my outreach community efforts by what my colleagues would tell me, what the politicians, especially the mayor of the district, would allow me to do. And but at the same time, I ended up taking advantage of people who would pass by. There is a site, there is a path nearby. It's about 10-15 meters away, and that's the path that goes to the river. And children and young women and young men constantly walk by to go and do the washing. And so when they would pass by, I either would call them or they would see us dig, and they would be curious, and then we would have our discussions about the site and the education in São Tomé. So this was kind of like my little rebellious to the limitations that I was imposed. One of the success stories, if I can call it, it is this young man. He's a 12-year-old. They call it the next generation of archaeology. So he lives in the village next to the site, and he started coming. The guy with the red T-shirt, it's his uncle, and so he started coming just to check what it was. And he came every single day that we were excavating, and he was really eager to help us. He loved to measure things and to screen, and so he ended up being the one of the most constant people in the team, actually. And I thought it was quite adorable. In the end, we didn't have much to give him to do because we were just drawing profiles and taking pictures and so on. And so he set up his own unit, which I thought was quite funny because he did it quite correctly. He did a small, I don't know, half a meter by half a meter unit. But I'm kind of hopeful that through these sporadic engagements with the local elements, I keep building my relationship with the community and try to transform the way that people actually see archaeology or perceive cultural heritage. So we were, since this was the first excavation in the country, we became a little bit of celebrities, and at the same time, an article that I wrote last year for Antiquity came out at the same time that we were excavating. So there was a bit of international publicity because of that article, and so we featured in the news. This is actually a crew from the Portuguese TV Africa channel. So it's a Portuguese channel for African countries and African news, but out of Portugal. And at the same time, as I was saying, it was the story was picked up with a number of international newspapers. For example, the Miami Herald and some other American and British publications. So we are trying to, it's what I called our 2 minutes of fame. I'm hoping that this momentary excitement about the site, because it is really fantastic, will actually help us obtain more funding and substantial funding to do a preservation project. And another of our problems, it's actually not in addition to the community outreach, that it was not what I was expecting or what I would have liked to do. One of the problems we have, it is really the classification of the site for protection, but the local politicians, except for the mayor of the district, the president of the district, which is this guy sitting here, actually he's trying really hard to bring awareness to the political establishment. And we were able to get, myself and my colleague, whose feet you see there, we were able to get a meeting with the Minister of Culture, and to try to press towards political awareness for the preservation of the site, because the political establishment doesn't even know that there is legislation. So the legislation was created in São Tomé for the preservation of built heritage, but it has never been used. And so we are trying that the politicians will pay some attention. It's going to take some time, but I hope that things will work out in the long run. And one of the issues it is I have to be there and work with my colleagues and try to put some pressure, but things don't work long distance. So what actually ended up happening, and I find that it's quite rewarding despite some of the difficulties that we had, it was how even if my funding was so meager, there was a kind of a mobilization. There was a creation of a network of solidarity from a builder, the owner of a building company that had the screens made for us in his carpentry place factory. My colleague Larissa Thomas from the USA was my colleague in grad school. She has been joining me for the last 2 seasons to help me manage some of these things, because it's quite impossible for one person to do all the work. And so she has been fundamental in helping with the field work, particularly managing the excavation and the survey and so on. And one of the last days that I was in São Tomé, I actually met a German professional photographer who was very excited about hearing about this site. He never even saw it, but he immediately told me, "Oh, I can do a drone video for you, and I can take pictures for you." It's like, okay, sure, please do it. I would be very happy. And he ended up doing the video, and I'll show you the video in a couple of minutes to give you an idea of the magnificence of the site. One of the public outreach events or activities that we did, I created a pamphlet that then I was giving to either politicians or local population. People would come by. I would give these pamphlets, and they are in Portuguese, and they tell a bit about the context of the site, or the context in which the site was was created. I had also the help of my colleague from with an architect that did the drawings for some of the reconstructions. And last but not least, we had the help of this lady here. That's the only picture I have of her. And she was the person who was cooking our lunches. So anyway, despite the meagerness of funding and some of the difficulties, we were actually able to accomplish quite something based particularly on the solidarity of a number of individuals that, one way or the other would try to help us. I will show you now the video. This is the last bit, but I will have to actually stop the share to share again and show you the video. So there is no sound. I will just show you. Let's see if I can make it work. So anyway, you'll have an idea of the location of not only the location of the site, but how it looks like and some of the difficulties that we have. So this is how it is now. And as I told you, we cleaned in front of the site, so we can actually see the facade. This would be the front of the building, and those small holes that you see on the walls, that's actually where wooden poles would be for verandas and things like that. This is another view of the facade. This would have been the main entrance. The interior of some of the lower level rooms, small rooms, that these small level rooms always have connection with the working space. Here you can see the ghost of the stairs to the second floor, and you can see the difference between the first floor and the second floor, where the second floor has plaster, and that would be where the people would have lived, and it would be only two small rooms. Something that it's quite common, it's the use of sugar molds, fragments of sugar molds to refurbish the walls, and we can see a lot of sugar molds and other ceramics stuck in the walls, and we can see that they are actually earlier ceramics, but they were used in the refurbishment. That's the very clean interior. We cannot get rid of that palm tree. And some of the other areas, the entrances or the communication between the rooms. And as if you see from above, you barely can see it. It's here, but as the drone goes down, you can see the building. And we had cleared quite a bit, and I thought we had cleared enough, but obviously from the air you cannot see the area that we cleared. You can see the interior better, but that's it. One of the goals of this video was that maybe we could do a 3D printing, but there are so many trees and so much vegetation that we cannot do it. The windows and the doors are typical of the Portuguese types of construction from the 16th century. So the dating that we have, it's based on the documents and also on the characteristics of the building itself. So far, we don't have C14. I will be doing some phytolytical analysis. Actually, have the collaboration of a Spanish colleague who is going to do the paleo-environmental research for the project, and we'll be able to actually see what were the implications, the environmental implications of the sugar production in São Tomé, because it was quite intensive. It didn't last very long, but it was quite intense, and most likely it changed the environment of the island. So that's actually what I have for today. I have a couple of other slides if anybody wants to ask questions about artifacts. I didn't get into that, but those are some of the people that actually were quite instrumental in helping from the funding agencies to a number of individuals that helped us put together the project and accomplish the project. And they are not all there. Lots of other people that the slide doesn't have enough space. But thank you very much for listening to it, and we can have some questions, and if anybody asks questions about artifacts, I have some to show you.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. That was an amazing lecture and such a really great site. I'm sure that people will have some questions. I wanted to start off with one. What it sounded like your community outreach. I loved your description of your little rebellion, and being able to connect with people even if there were other impediments.
I was basically forbidden. I was forbidden to do public lectures. I had
oh my gosh.
I had planned the public lecture in so there is kind of a community center, and I even had some of these young guys that worked with me last year. We already had arranged everything, and we were going to give a public presentation, and I was told, no, you cannot do that because it has to be managed by the political establishment.
Oh.
And so I was like, oh, that cannot do that. And then there were a couple of other issues that would make it a little bit tricky as well. And so it was okay. I didn't push too much my luck.
Yeah.
I had other things to do. So there was a crisis every day.
And you were saying that the community didn't really know about this place because it's so taken over by the jungle, right?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that are, and I didn't mention. So in one hand, you have it's just a vegetation around. The people live in the houses nearby, they know about it because they pass by, they can see it when they go to the river. But because this is a place of the ancestors, people don't cross don't cross the boundary. And so, for example, that woman that I was mentioning that cooks the food for us, the lunch for us, Donna Didi, she actually came to see the site. I was actually cleaning inside, and she came in and she entered and she looks at me and says, "Oh, I'm 60 years old and this is the first time that I come here." And I start talking to her about it, and I knew that it was a place of ghosts. So it is really, and now this slide that you can see now, it's kind of clean in front, but it was not like that. It was full of vegetation. So it's really, it's kind of like a Halloween special type of thing. And because people are aware that this was a sugar mill and that people suffered there. So they know that the ancestors suffered and the ancestors died there. And so they are not happy and you don't go inside. And so that's why the whole story about me breaking my leg last year was because, and I told them, look, I usually do the rituals or the ceremonies that are required. But last year I was not cutting anything. I was not digging anything, was just drawing. And they said, well, but probably there was some guy or some ancestor was not happy and pushed you. And so that's actually helped preserve the site as well. The other thing about the disconnection that people have with the location, it's because the populations that live around belong to a very specific ethnic group that I wouldn't say even ethnic group. I think it's actually more of an identity, and they are the descendants of Maroon communities that they existed a lot in the south of São Tomé, and these Maroon communities that would have lived in some areas further south and more towards the interior areas that were less accessible. In the early 19th century, they were convinced to settle on the coast, and with their boats, they start going up north along the coast. So most of the population in this village are actually not their origins. It's not from there, although we can argue that they are connected because they would have been, they are the descendants of the freed slaves, the runaway slaves, and the Maroon communities from the south, and so that's actually quite an interesting conversation to consider for the future. It is to have discussions about how is it that people actually see these. And going back, most population, I would say more than 50% of the population are recent arrivals. I mean, from in the island, in the country. So 50% of the population, it's under 20. And we know what that means. Then you have a large percentage of population that were brought in the late 19th century and 20th century as contract workers for the cacao plantations. And so they don't have that connection with the archaeological sites. And the only populations that are, I would say, they have a long history in the island. It's the Angulares, which is this group of the Maroon descendants of the Maroon community, and what we call the Forros, which are the original populations that were brought as enslaved populations from enslaved individuals from the continent, and then they were freed at some point, either during the 16th, 17th century, or later on, when at the end of the slavery. And so you have these different, especially these three different populations, and but there is no memory of other sites.
Fascinating.
Any questions? I can tell you a lot more about these. Yeah.
Hello, Doris. Can you hear me? I'm not
Yes.
sure it's,
Yes.
me and computers. Is this the only building you found? Is there anything around it, like other yeah, and of course, are there other mills all over the island?
No. So the issue, based on some of these older documents, and particularly the Dutch maps and the Portuguese documents, so there are lists of the mills, and we have the names of the places in some cases, or the names of the owners, and in some cases actually the names of the owners became names of places or place names. But my theory, it is that, except for these, because it was the biggest and the wealthiest estate in the island, that it was made of stone, all the other ones were made of wood, because the description from the 1540 that exists, it was a pilot in the sugar transport, and he gives a really good description of the original town of São Tomé, and he says that all the houses were made of wood, and so stone was not used. One of the characteristics of the island, it is so wooded that it made it very attractive for the sugar, because you need a lot of wood to burn for producing the sugar, for boiling the sap, and then to dry the sugar cones. That made it very attractive. But at the same time, the existence of so much wood would make it easier to build things made of wood, like the sugar mills, the houses. And some of the documents that are not pertaining to this specific estate, but are like really boring administrative documents, many of them ask the king to send carpenters. So every other letter, there's like, oh, the king so and so, please send us carpenters because the one that was here died. And so São Tomé was a place where you wouldn't go voluntarily. So the majority of the settlers, the initial settlers, were actually convicted, transported from the mainland, and they would have like that penalty commuted going to São Tomé, which was because of the diseases. So malaria was quite bad, and it's still not good. But so people knew that if you would go there, you wouldn't live very long, and so one of the characteristics of some of these letters to the king or to the council of the king, it's they keep asking for carpenters, which agrees with the description from the mid 16th century that says that the houses were made of wood, and this leads me to think that the sugar mills would be made of wood as well.
Okay.
Tendai, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. This is really interesting. I really enjoyed the lecture. Thank you. I have two questions. The first relates to gender relations, and if you found any evidence of gender relations, any artifacts that might help us understand the role of women at this particular site. And then the second question, which might be a completely different topic, is I know you do ethnography as well, and I was wondering what kinds, if any, ethnography you've been able to initiate.
So far, I haven't done any ethnography. I mean, my ethnography, it's kind of like the relationship that I'm establishing with the community, because that's also ethnography. It's maybe for a sociocultural person, it's not really ethnography, but it is part of ethnographic type of research and relationships. I have plans to interview, for example, all the individuals that claim ownership on this site, all the families, because it's really complicated, the genealogy, it's very complicated. And then starting by interviewing local populations and see if I can actually collect information that would relate not to this particular site, but to the Maroon communities, which I'm quite interested because I mean, we know that they existed. We don't know exactly where, and it would be quite nice to actually do the research on that, because one of the issues it is the historic narratives that exist, and they are not that many. They are kind of like the same old. They talk about, you know, the sugar production, the connection with Europe, the connection with Brazil, and so on. But there is no information about the daily life of people. And going back to the gender, so for this time period, I don't have a lot of, and for this site, I don't have information about gender. We also didn't do a lot of excavations, so we did test excavations. We did only 8 units of 1 by 1, a little bit more than that, maybe 10 units, because 2 units were 2 by 1. But so we don't have a lot of artifacts that would relate to gender. The majority of the artifacts that we have, it's actually roof tiles, which were imported from Portugal, because there is no clay production or ceramic production in São Tomé, and the remains of the sugar molds that people used for making of the sugar. There are some other types of small artifacts that show us the connection with continental Africa, but there is nothing that at this point I can say it is a gender relation. There is, although fairly well studied through the documents from an historic perspective, the gender history of the island, and it's very, very interesting, because the convicts that would come would be the white Portuguese guys that would come as convicts. So they were the white guys, and they would be given 2 slaves, 1 man and 1 woman, and the man would be to farm, and the woman would be to have children with. And one of the things that changed, so you have a large population of mixed race population at some point. And one of the things that changed really early, actually in the early 16th century, it was that there was a petition to the king to give freedom to these mixed race children. So in the system of slavery, it's what we call the law of the womb, at least in Portuguese, as we call it. So the child has the status of the mother. So if the mother was enslaved, the child would be also enslaved. And so they revert that in São Tomé very early in the 16th century. And what you have suddenly, it is all these, and the idea was for the children that were children of these white guys that had the farms and had the sugar mills, for these children to actually inherit the property of the parents. And so suddenly you have a large number of extremely wealthy women, and they end up playing an important role in the society. And they marry well because they were wealthy, so quite often they would marry either people from that would come to work as administrators, would be, you know, higher society men, but because they would die because of the diseases, of tropical diseases, they would have then more property and more status. And there is one story of one woman. This one, it's actually 17th century, and she was São Tomé, and she's described as a Black woman, and she married the nephew of the governor of the island sometime in the 17th century. I can't remember exactly the date, but maybe around mid 17th century. They travel back to Portugal because he was an element of the court. They go back to Portugal. She's received in the court. The guy dies very young, and then she has this amazing position in the Portuguese court, because she was wealthy, she was beautiful, and she built like a church and so on. So she's one example, but there were more. So one of the things that I'm quite interested in about São Tomé, it is this, and that comes from a gender perspective, it is the fact that there was a class of women that were quite wealthy, that basically had important social and economic positions in the island until the 19th and even the 20th century. But that I cannot tell you, it is archaeologically based, you know.
Thanks, that's really interesting, fascinating. And it sounds like there's a lot more to be discovered. So it sounds like a very rich site.
And one of the things that happens then in the 18th and 19th century, early 19th century, particularly in the 18th century, that we have a lot of references to these extremely wealthy women, and we know that we know who are some of their descendants today. It was that actually they were big landowners, but they were also quite they had quite an important role in the Atlantic slave trade. Yeah. So that was how the wealth was actually being made in the island, particularly after the mid 17th century or so. Other questions? No one else wants to ask questions. So you don't say anything about the beautiful video.
That was a beautiful video.
We are actually making a sound, so I have a text, and we are going to put music and so on. But Felix Vollmann, who is doing that, you know, we still need to actually iron things, but it will be a video to post online, and then have an idea of this site.
Wonderful. And I know you said that the artifacts that you found so far have mostly been the roof tiles.
Yes. Okay, let me show you. This is our group, our small group, and I'll show you. So a lot of we found actually. So we excavated basically 10 square meters, and some of the units were a little bit deep. But we got in the first two levels, so in the first top 20 centimeters, we got 105 kilos of roof tiles. And this is just a little thing. Yeah, 105 kilos. And then the second thing of artifacts, the second class of artifacts, that's I would say also, like, except for the tiles, 96% of the artifacts. It's actually what you see in this slide. It's the sugar molds, and so we have a lot of fragments of sugar molds. And there were a couple of objects that I'm very keen on showing them. And so we had like ceramics. This is some of it. It's actually Chinese ceramics. It's Portuguese glazed ceramics. There's some small pieces of metal, because the cauldrons where the sugar was boiled was made of metal, and those were actually the more expensive pieces of equipment. And then we have a number of ceramic pieces. It's not a lot, it's maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 pieces of ceramic that I can actually connect specifically with the African continent. And then there is one cowrie which was used in continental Africa or West Africa specifically as currency. And so we have these interesting connections with the mainland. So people who were enslaved, I would guess, would bring also material culture with them. There was no real production of ceramics in São Tomé. It's either these few elements of African ceramics, or the majority are actually Portuguese ceramics, but we don't have a lot yet. So that's in terms of artifacts what we have.
And I imagine that you're looking forward to finding a different variety as you expand the excavation.
Yes. So what we have, this is a very complicated site. It's a nightmare in terms of stratigraphy, because in the units that we had, most of them, the stratigraphy doesn't match from one unit to the other. And sometimes the units are 2 meters away from each other, and the stratigraphy is not the same. So there was a lot of stuff going on in this site and very close to the house. Lots of accumulation of ash mixed with sugar, fragments of sugar molds, sometimes quite big fragments of sugar molds. And we don't really have anything that I could say they are features that show the function. There are certain areas that I can tell probably there would have been some sort of a pavement, a stone pavement, but that's it. I cannot tell you they were making the sugar here, or the kitchen was there. Not yet. So we have next year, if I get money to go back, I have to open an area.
Sounds like you have your work cut out for you.
Not really.
And what was it that led to the abandonment of the site?
I'm sorry,
what was it that led to the abandonment of the site as a place of production?
Oh, I see. So this is actually a site that was used because the production of sugar was quite short-lived in São Tomé. It was replaced around 1560 by the sugar production in Brazil, and then there were successive slave revolts, and there was a big one at the end of the 19th century. At the end of the 16th century, 1595. There was a big one, and this revolt, there were enslaved men that created an army, and they went and burned a lot of these sugar mills. And so what happened, there was a big political instability at the same time, and that had to do with the fact of São Tomé being peripheric in terms of although it was central, it was, as a place, was peripheric for the administration. And so there was a lot of political instability, and what happened, it was the owners of the sugar mills picked up on these big cauldrons made of copper and all the machinery, and took it to Brazil, and they started their lives in Brazil, where there was more land available. And so that kind of ended the sugar cycle. There was then kind of a lower production period in terms of agriculture, which was the 17th century. Mid-17th and the 18th century. And then, but the island was basically an entrepot for the slave trade. And then what we end up having, it is some of this site ended up surviving because it changed what was being produced. So it went from producing sugar to producing rum, or the equivalent to rum, to producing cassava flour. And but at the end of the 18th century, we know it was already a ruin. But it was maintained for like 300 years or so.
Doris, can you please put the map back on? I'm trying to
Which map?
the
The
map of
the first map, the small map. This one?
yeah, I'm trying to find it. Okay, Praia Melão.
That's where it,
I'm trying to find it on the Google map.
yeah, you can
Praia
find it on Google Maps. It's very hard to see the site from on Google Maps because of the vegetation. You cannot see it on Google Maps.
was to get more detail. Praia.
Yeah, but it is a village, and so what usually gives you it's the village. When you Google it in Google Earth, gives you the village, and then it's quite. I can tell you where if I see it in Google Earth, I can tell where it is. It's about 5 kilometers south of the capital, and it's on a bay where it's very close to the coastline. And so most likely that's how the sugar was shipped out would be because this is a bay where boats could actually anchor. Any other questions? No, actually, I never check on the chat.
I've had
Someone was asking about what the sugar molds were made of. So the sugar molds are actually made of ceramic, and there was a slide where I had it showing it at the end. Actually, yeah, there it is. So those are just the fragments, but here the sugar molds are upside down. So they are basically these cones made of ceramic, and they have a little hole at the end. So at this end there is a small hole, and they would be put the other way. And after the sugar sap would have been or the sauce would have been boiled. It would be then put in these molds, and the molasses would run through that little hole, would be caught in a pot, and the sugar would crystallize. So that's actually, and there is actually a typology for the sugar molds. There are some that are quite small. I mean, when I say quite small, a piece of sugar would be like 5 kilos or so, but you have some that are really big that were like 15 kilos or so.
Wow.
Yeah, those are actually called bells, like the bells, the church bells, sinos in Portuguese, because that's actually how they were so big. Yeah, and I do have some that were big. I don't know yet how big because I still haven't done the artifact analysis. I'm going back in February and March to do the artifact analysis. And there was any other question because I couldn't.
I didn't see any others come up in the chat. Well, if
Okay,
if no one
was the only one about the sugar molds.
Yes.
Yep.
And if no one has any final questions, I know that you are quite a few hours ahead of us here in Denver.
Yes, it's 10:30 for me.
Ah, goodness.
I can go and have tea.
Then thank you very much. On behalf of Denver AIA, I want to thank Dr. Cruz for the amazing lecture and such fascinating site. I can't wait to see more what further research comes out of this. And
let's hope that some funding agency feels pity of me and will give me like, I don't know, 250,000. That's what I need.
Perfect.
For a starting point, or someone really wealthy that could actually give us money.
We'll start shaking the richest trees that we can find.
You see, I'm not really good with. That's why I was so excited about all the publicity. Although, I mean, it was a bit self-serving in the sense that like, oh, maybe someone will read one of these articles and will decide to donate $250,000.
That is, my understanding is
I want to contact Oprah Winfrey. I just don't know how.
it's my understanding is that as an academic and an archaeologist, you need to do a lot of self-advocacy.
Yeah, but I'm not really good with social media because that's why, you know, it took me maybe a couple of months, and it was actually my friend Larissa who mentioned something about the metrics of the article that we published. And then I went to check it last week, and I was like, oh, it has been downloaded 2,000 times or something like that, or viewed 2,000 times. And I don't even pay attention to those things. So if anybody wants to do social media for me, please help me.
And
Well, you know, your article could be posted to a few of the Facebook groups. The groups have ones like there are groups for meteorites up here, groups for archaeology, groups for everything. Some groups are not at all serious, some are.
I'm kind
And
of
your
hoping,
article
I'm
could
kind
be
of hoping
posted.
that Archaeology magazine will publish a longer article. The British equivalent,
That would be good.
the Current World Archaeology has published one, and they have a readership of, I don't know, 30,000 people or something. But the Archaeology magazine, that would be the ideal. And maybe we can swing the opinions to give us some money. But I'm writing some grants at this point. That's what I'm trying to do now.
fantastic. And of course, everyone is welcome to stay a little bit longer, but just to formally thank everyone who came out for the lecture too. It is great that you could be here with us today, and keep an eye out. Where the Denver AIA's next lecture is going to be hybrid, and the details for that will be available soon. And it's going to be an excavation of the sex district in Central City here in Colorado. But yeah, just keep an eye out for that. And one more time, thank you, Dr. Cruz, for all of your research. And this is just, I desperately hope that someone ends up giving you at least $250,000, because it's such a unique site in such an important.
And it is not only because it's so fantastic, but it's also, in terms of the preservation of the building, but it's also the history of the place that's quite amazing. And it's really in risk of being destroyed. So let's hope that we can actually get the political power to classify it and then get the funding.
It's I wish that we had time for another whole lecture on the political situation, because it sounds like there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's a very complicated place. It's very small, but it's very complicated. It's only 200,000 people.
Wow.
And so it fits inside like Englewood or something. But at the same time, the politics are still very complicated, and that's what we have to deal with. And I hope that my colleagues are very keen, but it depends on who is in power at the time. And my hope in terms of future, it's really that the students and these young men and women who worked with me, they will be doing the follow-up in the artifact analysis in February and March. So I hope that they will at some point become university professors, professional archaeologists, and will be able to actually do their own research and expand the research that needs to be done.
Well, we should do that every year. You can bring us an update every year.
Yeah, I can. Next time I can show you, like, well, those are the ceramics. I counted them. And, I have like phytolytic analysis to do, and someone will have to do the zooarchaeology and so on. So let's hope. If not every year, every 2 years or every 3 years, maybe not every year.
Just don't go break anything else.
I hope
Yeah.
not. I did the ceremony, so things worked well this year.
That's
The
good.
ancestors were on my side.
Well, we should let you go get your tea
Yes.
and get your rest. Thank you very much.
And thank you for staying until now. And hopefully we can actually have another lecture at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
In person.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Anytime.
Okay, take care then.